Hello fellow beer drinkers, welcome to Pause for a Pint, the show that makes you stop and think, what should I drink? Today we're going to be looking at the movie that finally landed Leonardo DiCaprio his first Academy Award, and that is 2016's The Revenant. The movie follows the real-life events of a man named Hugh Glass who miraculously survived a brutal bear attack while scouting with a group of American fur traders. After being left for dead by his team, Hugh Glass spent the next 6 weeks traveling 200 miles to make his way back to Fort Kiowa. And also to get revenge on the man who killed his son. You know, no big deal. What I really loved about this movie is it has an amazing way of immersing you in the wilderness. You feel the cold, stiff air. You feel the frigid, cold waters of the Missouri River. The movie has a connection with nature that helps the viewer get lost in this world. And what really helped convey this was how they shot the movie. Unlike other movies where they shoot every scene when it's convenient, the entirety of this movie was shot in order with natural lighting. They would spend most of the day rehearsing, and then when the lighting was just right, they would only have a couple hours to get the scene done, and if they didn't, they would have to wait till the next day to shoot it. But ultimately, the natural lighting really helps focus the main struggle of the movie, which is man versus nature. Hugh Glass and his struggle to make his way back to civilization, to avenge his son's death. The director Alejandro G. Inarritu stated that the theme of the movie
is survival and spiritual growth through physical pain.
And it's this theme paired with the need to keep pushing on and survive that are really shown in a couple scenes in particular. There are scenes when Glass is panting heavily and you can hear him breathing, and the camera cuts away to a different shot, but overlaid you can still hear the sound of him breathing. And this really helps convey the message of living on after something ends. And even at the end of the movie, when the movie cuts to credits and there's no music and you just hear the sound of him breathing. And this can be seen in even the title of the movie. The definition of Revenant is a person who has returned, especially supposedly from the dead. So, I bet you're all thinking, what does this have to do with beer? Well, let's talk beer. So the first part is to look at history. The movie takes place in 1823, and beer was really in a very transitional period in America at that time. Prior to the late 1700s, a lot of Americans were drinking a lot of English styles, stuff like porters, English pale ales. After the American Revolutionary War, patriotic Americans were shying away from this style and starting to drink a lot more whiskey. Because this movie focuses so much on nature, it's important for us to look at environment. We know because of the real-life events that The Revenant takes place in South Dakota, and the movie really focuses on imagery of cold, snowy, and wooded landscapes. So for starters, dark beers are great for winter drinking. And because this movie isn't very dialogue driven, a lot of the movie is visually driven. High alcohol beers are not a problem. Basically what I'm saying is that you can get drunk and still understand what's going on in the movie. Beers with a little bit of English influences are allowed as long as there's something more than just an English style and they bring something else to the table. And lucky for us, the craft beer world loves barrel aging beers. So barrel aged beers are in, and extra points if it's whiskey barrel aged. Because the movie focuses so heavily on survival and perseverance, beers that develop in flavor as they warm up will blend well with this film. I know we've been talking a lot about these dark beers, but that doesn't mean that beers with strong hop flavor are out of the picture. There are plenty of hops that provide a lot of pininess or earthiness that will really go well with these nature shots. So overall, some beers to avoid. I would avoid IPAs that have a lot of those citrus flavors because that will blend better with more tropical settings. Easy drinking German Pilsners. Hefeweizens or sours that have those soft, sweet fruit notes. If you're typically a Hefeweizen drinker, I would recommend looking into some brown ales, maybe some Dunkels, and there's been enough talking, not enough drinking. Now it's time to talk about beer. We're actually going to start with one that I feel really fits the mood and themes of The Revenant, which is nature, and really focuses on the elements in South Dakota. My first selection is going to be Pint. It is a hoppy dark ale with juniper in it, which is really going to bring out a lot of pininess. It's dark, it's malty, but it's also very hoppy, bitter. It really brings out the ruggedness of The Revenant because there's a lot of scenes that are really almost painful to watch. Let's open this bad boy up. So, Rising Pine's from Uinta. They're in Salt Lake City, Utah. It's 7.5% alcohol. Let's try this out. Straight off the nose, you get almost like a sweet, like caramely brown notes. You definitely get some of that like pine in there too, just a little bit, but very subtle. Let's try a sip. So you start to get like a tiny bit of sweetness, but before any of that can take over, you really get overwhelmed with some malt bitterness and some hop bitterness, but it doesn't feel like your typical very crisp hoppy bitterness. It's very like almost like muddy and gravelly, especially the opening scene of when they're walking through that mud. It really focuses on the water and the mud and nature. Oh, that really brings that out. I feel like you get a little bit of the pine in the taste. I wish there was a little more. We're going to put this off to the side and see how it warms up. We'll come back to it.
20 minutes later.
After letting it warm up, that kind of sweet malt, that bittering sweet malt kind of dies down a little. You get a little bit more of that pininess, a little less dryness in the finish. It feels a little thinner, more crisp. It kind of changes as it warms up, as most dark beers would. We're going to move on to the next one. So, for the next one, to understand this pairing, we really have to look at where beer was in America. After the Revolution, a lot of patriotic Americans were really shying away from any influences that England had brought. So, instead of that, they started turning to whiskey. Roll clip.
On va fêter ça. Amène le whisky. Allez. On vous donne des fusils et des munitions.
So during the movie, I thought that an English old ale aged in whiskey barrels kind of shows a little bit of the past, but also influences from their present. So the beer we're going to be looking at is Whiskey Barrel Aged Hibernation from Great Divide, and they are from Denver, Colorado. So let's open this guy up. It is a take on their regular hibernation ale, but of course done in whiskey barrels. Let's see how this smells. You get a lot of English malt straight off the bat. Almost that like caramely toffee notes, but not too sweet. Almost a little woody in the nose. Let's try this out. Ooh. I can honestly say after having the regular hibernation, and this is what I was hoping from this version, it brings a lot of vanilla to the table. A lot of vanilla through that whiskey barrel. Oh, get a beautiful like whiskey finish, but it's not too strong. This beer clocks in at 11.5%, and it honestly doesn't taste that. It's tasting around like a 7 or an 8. This is actually really good. Despite the flavor, it's actually pretty crisp. Like, I feel like it was going to be a lot thicker. You get this beautiful, almost like English brown color. You would think it would pour a lot darker. That is absolutely delicious. It also pairs really well with beef tenderloin. So, you know, that's a plus. Revenant is actually a really long movie, so the downside of this beer is that it's like a $9 or $10 12-ounce bottle, whereas the last one was a 12-ounce six-pack, and you could drink the six-pack through the course of the 2.5 hours of the Revenant. The downside of this one is that because it's such a smaller format for a high price, you're really limited to this one bottle, and it really kind of forces you to take your time with it. Keep that in mind, and with that being said, I think we're ready to move on to our next beer. So, for our third selection, I have gone with Epic's Big Bad Baptista, which is a take on their Big Bad Baptist. This one's done with Mexican coffee, cacao nibs, cinnamon flavors, and 100% barrel aged in whiskey barrels. I feel that this is a really good fit. I've had it before. It's delicious. A bottle of this will cost you around $14. It is 22 ounces, so a bigger format. You could slowly sip on this. This beer clocks in at 11.7%. So I feel like that's a good sweet zone if you're having just one bottle, 22 ounces of that. Especially during the opening scene, this at critical times in the movie pairs really well. So let's open this up. Enough talking. Let's open this up and see what we're dealing with. Do a gentle pour at first. We're going to open up some of that CO2. You really want the beer to breathe. Okay, let's get a smell. Oh, you kind of get those Mexican coffee notes. You honestly get a good amount of cinnamon in the nose, which normally you get cinnamon like later on. Ooh, I would say you get a little bit more sweet and Mexican than earthy notes, but there are some subtleties in that. Enough about the nose. Let's just take a sip. Whoa. Right off the bat, that beer is, for one, a lot thicker and creamier than the previous beers we've tried. You almost get a little bit of booziness in that. You do get subtle vanilla for something that was that much whiskey. You don't get a huge amount of vanilla, but I feel like if they did that, it would just clash too much with the Mexican coffee and the cinnamon. Those two ingredients themselves blend really well together. So I will say this beer is only available once a year, usually towards the end of fall, maybe early winter. I believe I grabbed mine a couple weeks before Thanksgiving.
Mind if I cut in?
Not at all. Hi, everyone. This is Mark. What do you think?
Well, the fact that on the label itself it doesn't say it's made with chocolate, it's made with cacao nibs. It's the original form of chocolate. You can have varying degrees of cacao in chocolate, and it's not actually sweet. People usually think more toward milk chocolate. This is more like dark chocolate. 100% cacao isn't going to be sweet. It's going to be really intense, bitter flavor.
Yeah. Definitely.
This is actually somewhat how I imagine, the traditional ancient Mayan drink chocolatiel might drink, where you have a lot of really prominent spice notes, prominent bitterness. The sweetness kind of falls more by the wayside. There's a really nice, whiskey warmth that comes with it.
Definitely.
Especially as you start to sip on it more and more. When it's cold, your first sip, you're going to get a lot of spice and maybe a bit of the chocolate and, hints of vanilla. It's going to open up a lot more to be kind of warmer, more bitter. I say warmer, I don't mean temperature warmer. I mean the flavor on your palate becomes warmer. Really, it's a wicked tasty beer.
Definitely. Overall, this is a damn good beer. The downside is that I do feel like the Mexican spices in this pulls away from where the Revenant takes place. Still a fantastic beer. So, let's move on. With all that said, let's summarize. Rise and Pine really encompasses the nature aspect. We did feel that it was lacking. We thought it would have a little more pine, but still a delicious beer. Secondly, we have whiskey barrel-aged hibernation. Very good. Positives that this really pays tribute to what was going on in America with beer and drinking at the time. Downside is, of course, the format and pricing. If you're going to buy this beer, you're probably only going to get one, and I'm not sure it would last you the entirety of the movie. Lastly, the Big Bad Baptista. Fantastic beer. Positives that it does pay a little bit of tribute. You do get that whiskey barrel aged. The stout is really the first thing that comes to mind when I think of this movie of what style overall I would pair is barrel aged stouts. The negatives is that the Mexican coffee and flavors really aren't the region in which the Revenant takes place. So with all that being said, it's time to pick a winner. And here on this show, we can only pick a winner in the best way. And that's to really get immersed in the movie. But I don't have a bear, and I don't really want to get attacked by a bear. We're going to have to come up with something else. Luckily, being here in New England, we have the next best thing, and that's being wicked frickin' cold. Do what you gotta do. Do it quick. Do it quick.
Okay, that's enough.
And after long consideration, our winner is barrel-aged hibernation.
Okay.
And if you made it this far, first of all, thank you for watching. Before we end this video, I really wanted to throw an extra surprise. So if we throw up the map of where the Revenant took place, you could see where he was attacked by a bear and where he had to crawl all the way to Fort Kiowa. And right somewhere in between, in the present day, we have a little brewery called Bill of Rights Brewing. The brewery is ridiculously close to where the Revenant took place. The idea of having a beer that was brewed like less than 20 miles from where Hugh Glass was actually crawling through the dirt sounded really cool to me. We have Bill of Rights bear arms, which I thought is also appropriate considering the bears. First off, I'd like to thank the guys over at Bill of Rights for hooking me up with this beer. It was really nice of them. So let's see what we got. Let's give it a smell. Ooh, you get some rich chocolate notes, some nuttiness. Ooh, that smells really good. Let's take a sip. Ooh, that's cool. So it starts off with a little bit of sweet nuttiness. Get a little bit of that coffee, but it's very light. But then you kind of have this lurking finish that slowly builds up, and you get this nice like smokiness on the back end that slowly gets more and more intense as your tongue kind of dries out. And it's like a really delayed finish. It gets roastier and this nice like smokiness. That finish is really complex, and I actually really dig how that kind of hits you later and it slowly builds up with that smokiness. Yeah, I could see this going really well with the movie. You have a growler of it, share it with a couple friends, maybe watch the movie. First off, thank you to Bill of Rights Brewing for hooking me up with this beer. Also, if you're in Perry, South Dakota, check them out. They have a great tap room. You can get growler fills there. So feel free to leave a comment. What beers would you pair with the Revenant? And what movie would you want to see covered in a future episode? If you like what you saw here, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. In 2 weeks, we'll get episode 2. It will be Stranger Things Season 1. Thank you for watching Pause for a Pint. This has been episode 1. Hope to see you soon. We can share another beer. And until then, stay thirsty.